Hello, I'm Alan Malden with Telegeography. Today I'm going to be giving a presentation about the utopian future of international networks. So why would I ever want to do anything that is about a utopia, given what's been happening in the world last year and thus far this year? Well, let me explain a little bit. So this is a follow-up presentation to one that I gave 5 years ago at PTC, which was the dystopian future of international networks. So I'm going to do the opposite here and try to provide something a bit more positive and upbeat for us to get the year started off. So what is a utopia exactly, so we're all clear here? So a utopia is an imagined place or state of things in which everything is perfect and good. So it's the opposite of a dystopia. So what I plan to do in this presentation is go through some of the commonly associated traits of what a utopia is, and then try to tie in a trait or a trend that we've been seeing in the international networks industry to that trait. So let's get started here. You can see how this is going to work. First of all, utopian trait 1, a concept brings society together. So for this, I want to look at compound growth and bandwidth demand. So Einstein supposedly said that compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe, but I think in this industry, the compound growth of bandwidth demand is proving to be one of the most powerful forces. So just how fast is demand growing and how fast is it compounding? Let's have a look at this chart here. This chart is showing over the last decade, what is the pace of demand growth on major international routes. So the growth has been rapid, between 40 to 60% on most of these routes. But what does this mean in terms of doubling rate? How fast is it compounding? Let's consider a few different levels here. Let's first look at what would it take to double every 3 years? That would take a 26% compound annual growth rate. As you can see here, all these routes are above that threshold. Let's go more rapid. Let's go doubling every 2 years. Well, that is a 41% rate of growth. So all the routes still are above that level. And finally, even faster, let's go to doubling every 18 months. That would be a 59% annual growth rate. And you can see here that a few routes are indeed still above that threshold. So really we're seeing a very rapid pace of doubling really across the world, no matter which route it is. The next trait I want to talk about is society becoming more equitable. And for this, I want to look at prices and see if prices are becoming more equitable somehow. Are they becoming similar in some way? So this chart here is showing the median monthly 100 gigabit wavelength lease price over the past 5 years. And you can see the prices are coming down really across the board. But are they actually becoming similar to each other? For this, let's look at these routes all compared to the lowest price here, which is the London to New York route, and see if there has been some compression. So when we do this comparison, you can see that the dark blue is 2016, the aqua color here is 2020, and that the price multiple over the London to New York benchmark route here has indeed been changing. There has been a reduction really on all the routes here over the last 5 years. So for LA Sydney, for example, it used to be about 12 times higher than London to New York, and now it's just under 7 times. So really a big change in the disparity of prices across the world. But are we going to see equality? Well, I think it certainly is possible to see more narrowing of prices. We're seeing more rapid growth in many developing markets where there are higher prices. And when there's more rapid demand growth, that could lead to the ability for unit costs to reduce compared to what we're seeing in the larger markets, which already have fairly low unit costs. Second of all, more competition coming, not just from new cables being built, but also new types of company entering the markets on many routes where prices are a bit higher, let's say. And finally, there is a role for technology here. So as we see the introduction of more express routes and landings directly in data centers, that does help to reduce the cost of equipment. And again, whatever you can do to reduce the costs is going to be passed along to customers generally in the form of lower prices. But I think it's worth noting that prices will never be the same across all routes. There's just too many variations in the underlying unit costs due to differences in demand and distances which cannot be overcome. So there will be some level of differences in prices, but I think we'll see some continued narrowing over time. The next trait I want to look at is an economic system that doesn't favor a certain group. So when it comes to who is investing in new submarine cables, is one group being favored or not? Well, let's look at the data that we have on when new cables have been entering service from 2014 to 2022, and looking at roughly which types of companies are those that are involved in investing in these cables to build the cables, right? So you can see here from 2020 to 2022, it's kind of remarkable. It's been a pretty even split between these three categories. The bottom here, the bottom blue, that's the content providers. So it's Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. The aqua color here is the traditional carriers, companies like Orange and Telstra. And then the top part, the red bar here, this is carriers, wholesalers, whatever you want to call them, companies like an Aquacoms, Bulk, Hawaii, RTI. These companies have continued to invest in new cables over the past several years. So are we seeing some shifts in cable investment, and how's that trending? Well, I think even though content providers shown in the previous chart do not dominate overall in the market, they definitely do on some routes. On the Atlantic, for example, they are definitely the vast majority of investment in new cables there. Also, content providers are absolutely vital to get some cable projects built. So they may not take the majority share of the investment, but having them to take a third or a quarter, let's say, of the investment is really a key part for those cables to get off the ground. And also, if we do take into account not just the investment in building the cables, but also subsequent sales of SLTE and the purchases of bandwidth, then content providers, definitely are the dominant player in the market here. Thinking about the future and how we could see more changes in cable investment, well, with the increasing fiber pair count in SDM cables, it's possible that we could see new types of companies decide to invest. The cost per fiber pair has been coming down as we move from 4 to 8 to 16 fiber pair cables. Even further advancements could really bring the cost per pair down to a level that is very attractive for new companies to become involved in investing from the outset in new cables. The next trait is individuality and innovation are welcomed. So for this, I want to take a look at what we're seeing in terms of improved route diversity in many recently launched cables and some planned cables as well. So a few that I've identified here. First, the L-Link project between Portugal and Brazil. This should be done the first half of this year. Oman to Australia, going to be the first cable between the Middle East and the west coast of Australia. Recently launched the end of last year, the Havfru system AEC2, which links the US to Denmark and Norway. An extra branch to Ireland is planned for the future as well. And then finally here, the CAP1 cable is planned between the US and Philippines. This is a unique route. It doesn't go between Japan and the US like the majority of Transpac cables currently do. So some new options there for diversity coming in the Pacific. But it's not just about the diversity of routes. We're also seeing improvements in terms of a landing point diversity. So two examples here that I've cited, the JGA South cable with the first East Coast Australian landing in Maroochydore, which is just, you can see there on the map, it's north of the Sydney area. And next, the To Africa cable, which is going to provide some new landings for Egypt, which is definitely a much needed feature to enhance the resiliency of trans-Egypt traffic. Utopian trait 5 is technology solves problems of resource exhaustion. So first, let's take a look back at how technology has really benefited the industry over this century to get some idea of the perspective here. So on the Atlantic and the Pacific, the capacity of all the cables that have entered service from 2000 until the end of last year, we can see that there's been a 472-fold increase in the Atlantic of the capacity. And the Pacific, a mere 357-fold increase, just a massive amount of capacity that we've been able to add to these two routes over the course of this century. So how do we do this? Well, it was really due to the ability of cables as they evolved over the past century to carry greater and greater amounts of bandwidth. So in the year 2000, a typical cable could carry possibly, let's say, 4 pairs at 640 gigabits per pair for 2.56 terabits per cable. Whereas cables entering service, towards the end of last year, cable like the Do Not cable, for example, 12 fiber pairs, roughly, let's say 20 terabits per pair. We're already seeing new cables in excess of this with 16 pairs. So a lot of new capacity per cable has really helped us to achieve these gains that we've seen thus far this century. Now, to do this, what's interesting about this is we've only seen less than one new cable per year for both the Atlantic and the Pacific, which is maybe a little bit surprising given we've seen this 300, 400-fold increase in capacity. But this is really due to the role of technology. So to demonstrate just how important technology is to achieving the growth we've experienced this century, let's consider, what if we didn't have any developments in new technology? What if we were stuck with a 4 fiber pair cable that would carry a total capacity of 2.56 terabits? So we would have needed to have a few more cables than what we currently had. Not just a few, a lot more. Let's change the y-axis here and see what we would have needed. We would have required 330 new cable spans in the Atlantic and 201 in the Pacific. Again, this is a good way to see just how important over time that the tech advances have been in preventing us from adding just a massive number of new cables. It also would have been extremely expensive if we hadn't had these advances. How much? Well, we did spend about $7 billion on cables in the Atlantic over this century, but we would have had to spend $66 trillion if we didn't see any improvements beyond the 2.56 terabit cable, right? So clearly we avoided this really expensive scenario from happening. So now let's take a look at how these trends in the past may apply to the future. So in these two charts, I plotted 3 different demand growth scenarios here of 40, 30, and 20% annual growth. And then the red line here, that's the existing and planned cables potential capacity. As you can see, it looks as though in the second half of this decade, we are still going to need more new cables in all these scenarios. Now, the question you're asking yourself, I'm sure, is, so how many new cables will we need on these routes? The answer is, it depends. And it depends really on 2 primary factors here. First of all is the pace of demand growth. Demand is really challenging to predict. If it grows, it could grow at 30 to 40% still. It may even slow a bit. There could be a need or the desire to try to optimize things, improve caching and storage that could in some ways limit the need to have so much data sent internationally. Second, and probably even more important, is what is the capacity per cable going to be during this period? We've been going from 12 fiber pairs to 16 with plans to go 20 and beyond, and it could be possible in the future to see a single cable capable of carrying nearly 1 petabit of capacity. But even then, even with a 1 petabit cable, there could be a need for several of these cables per year, depending on the demand growth that we're going to see. So ultimately, it seems that unless demand growth slows substantially, the industry is really going to need to be prepared to invest more in new cables per year than it has really in recent years. The last trait I wanted to touch on here is society continuing to evolve as new challenges arise. These photos here are showing different views of what a utopia is over time. So with the pandemic last year, we've all had to evolve and change how we work and adapt to this challenge. We've had to do things like have 43-person video calls. We had that at our company late last year, but hopefully we can evolve and move beyond this and continue to improve as an industry. So just a final word of caution here. This is about the utopian future of international networks, but we need to bear in mind from the very beginning, I stated that a utopia, it's an imagined place, and there are still challenges ahead for us. So we need to have continued investment across the industry to cope with the compounding effect of demand growth. There are substantial geopolitical and regulatory challenges that are also widespread around the globe and are causing challenges and to us that we need to overcome. And finally, the digital divide still exists, and more efforts are needed to improve network access and also the reliability of these networks really around the world. So thank you for your attention. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. My email is here. I'm happy to get back in touch with you if you have any questions or comments. Thank you again for your time.